Nautica is a character that straight up breaks the rules of Reverse 1999. Her whole kit scales off HP, and not only is she insanely hard to kill, she also hits harder than anyone else in the game. Right now, she's the uncontested strongest carry. Everything about her revolves around HP, and the first mechanic you need to know is Bloodtithe. If you played with Ezra's Euphoria a couple patches back, you've already seen it in action. You get a stack from either 3000 self-damage or 10,000 damage taken from the enemy. How many stacks you can hold depends on your team's total HP, though some passives can push it even higher. Now, you could spend Bloodtithe to heal the team, but in reality no one actually does that. You're mostly consuming it with Bloodtithe characters. A lot of Nautika's attacks drain her HP, which help with Bloodtithe generation, but that also will constantly push her HP to the lower point. But don't worry, she's not just going to knock herself out. Her drain can push her below 15% HP, and she's got this crazy revive mechanic. Once per turn, she can pop back up by spending Bloodtithe, though each time it costs more. On top of that, she gets a unique buff called Warmth. It says it lasts 3 turns, but every time it's reapplied, the timer resets, so it's basically permanent unless she gets stunned for multiple turns in a row. It stacks up to 15 times, at which point gives her 30% max HP. Stack that with her already huge base HP, her broken Psycube, and the right supports, and she can hit over 30,000 HP easily. And an even more busted part of her is that a lot of her damage scales off HP, which actually make her kind of ignores enemy defense. The way Reverse 1999's formula works, the base damage is actually calculated by directly doing attack minus defense. Most characters can hit around 2000 attack at best, but Nautica, her skills use 10 to 25% of her HP as attack, and with 30,000 HP, that's anywhere from 3000 to 7500 attack. Because of that, she won't feel much even against enemy with over 1000 HP. Another thing is, when it comes to her HP scaling skills, ranking them up doesn't boost the multiplier. Instead, actually increase the HP scaling directly, which ends up being a much bigger increase in damage, as in a way, the increased damage bypass enemy defense completely. So that's the core of her kit. Now let's get into her actual skills. Nautica's skill 1 is simple, but it does a lot of work. It drains her HP, hits 2 enemies, gives her a stack of warmth, and deals damage that scales off both attack and HP. Overall, you'll want to use this skill pretty much every turn. It will help with generating Bloodtithe, and it's the fastest way to stack up warmth. Her second skill actually splits into 2 choices each time you cast, giving you a choice between an attack version and a counter version. Let's start with the counter. When you use the counter skill, she gains damage reduction, a healing bonus based on missing HP, and she can earn warmth whenever she's hit while the buff is on. The counter itself doesn't riposte right after an enemy attack like most counters do. Instead, it tracks how much Bloodtithe you've generated, and for every 8 stacks of Bloodtithe generated, Nautica fires off an attack and HP scaling AoE. That strike also drains 20% of her current HP, which feeds even more Bloodtithe, making the loop fueling itself. This is one of her biggest sources of AoE damage, and it stacks warmth quickly in multi-target fights. The counter's effects last 3 turns, and you will want to use the attack version of skill 2 instead when you don't need to refresh it. First, it triggers an HP drain on everyone on the field, your team and the enemy. The enemy side is capped at a certain percentage of Nautica's max HP, so it won't delete bosses, but it's still a strong chunk that also turbocharges Bloodtithe. Then it lands a single target hit that scales with her max HP, and the multiplier increases with total units on the field. Finally, it gives your team a special buff, which provide damage reduction and damage bonus that scale up with missing HP. Nautica's ultimate is absurd, and it is the strongest ultimate in the game right now. It is also the core of her damage. Nautica doesn't use Moxie for her ultimate. Instead, it's replaced by Faith. You gain Faith whenever the team builds Bloodtithe, and it fills very quickly with her team. But you don't really want to use it on cooldown, because the damage on it actually scales with your current Bloodtithe. When you cast it, Nautica enters the channel. At the end of the turn, she consumes up to 64 Bloodtithe and converts that into 24 blood sacrifices. Each blood sacrifice is a random single target strike, and the sequence finishes with a large AoE that hits every enemy before healing her for a lot of HP. The numbers on this ultimate are honestly wild. Each strike uses 25% max HP as its attack, and with 30,000 HP, that equals roughly 7,500 attack before any buffs. The final AoE uses 50% max HP as attack, which is high enough that enemy defense has very little impact on the overall damage. The strikes prioritize enemies that are still alive, which minimizes wasted damage until the final AoE splash. All of the hits are treated as one attack with multiple damage instances, similar to Flutter Page and 37's extra on-hit damages, so buffs are consumed once and they also trigger once. If you do not have enough Bloodtithe, she defaults to a different version, but you would pretty much never run into that situation. This attack is also counted both as a follow-up and the ultimate, which allow it to synergize with many different characters. When casting this ultimate, you should always try to end her turn at low HP. Her missing HP buffs peak around 80% missing HP, so you get more damage out of it. And with the ultimate heals her after, you don't have to worry about her safety from it. Now, this is even more important to do if you have Semmelweis on her team, because Semmelweis provide a lot of insane buffs that become stronger at lower health, maxing out at 80% missing health. And with her Euphoria, the value of her buff on became absolutely insane. Semmelweis's buff have two parts. The team-wide buff is decent, but whoever is targeted by her special buffing skill gets even more powerful buffs. I'm not going to go too much into details regarding her kit, but for the character that she buffs at 80% missing health, she provides 20% crit rate, 20% crit damage, 75% damage bonus, 50% follow-up damage bonus, 32% healing bonus, and costs 15% current health drain on action. Her Euphoria also give her free Moxie for each 8 Bloodtithe generated, which means she no longer need to worry about her ultimate rotation. Outside of Semmelweis, Nautika also works insanely well with follow-up supports. That's because her two biggest damage sources, her counters and her ultimate, both count as follow-up attacks. With Flutter Page, it's straightforward. She is the best follow-up buffer in the game, and that alone pushes Nautika's damage way higher. Fatutu though adds a whole other layer. First off, she increased follow-up damage and bring a massive amount of healing. Since Nautika's HP drain is based on her current HP, being topped off means the next drain pulls from a bigger number, which builds Bloodtithe even faster. But the real synergy here is from her damage sharing. Normally, damage from enemies generates Bloodtithe really slowly. Fatutu flips that around by converting a portion of enemy damage into team HP drain, and HP drain gives way more Bloodtithe. With a full team, this can mean up to 175% more Bloodtithe generate from enemy attacks, supercharging her ultimates. Kakania can actually do the same thing with her damage sharing effect, but the downside is her attack buff is practically useless with Nautika. Right now, the Semmelweis plus Flutter Page plus Fatutu Core is pretty much the best team you can run with Nautika. But even if you don't have them, there are still plenty of solid substitutes. For the HP draining and healing, you've got Eternity, Medicine Pocket, and Euphoria Ezra. Eternity's first Euphoria lets her bring some buffs to the table while also adding more HP drain, which helps the team build Bloodtithe faster. Medicine Pocket is a mix of HP drain and healing. The problem is that his healing isn't that amazing for Nautika. He does get a missing health-based healing from his Euphoria, but it uses his missing HP instead of the target's missing HP, so it doesn't really help in Nautika's case. Compared to that, Euphoria Ezra has way better healing. He restores HP at the start and end of the turn, and also whenever his mushrooms pop. The trade-off is that his buffs and debuffs are harder to control and often get used up too quickly compared to Medicine Pocket's debuff. And then there's also Melania. Her whole thing is boosting ultimates, and let's be real, Nautika's ultimate is one of the strongest in the game, and you will definitely feel the boost from it. For Resonance, you just want to stack as much HP as possible with, of course, some crit if possible. And as always, you can copy the code from description and pinned comment directly to use with your Nautica. Now when it comes to Psycoops, her signature is unmatched. It gives a ridiculous amount of HP, and that alone also makes it one of the best Psycoops in the game for any character that struggles to survive. If you've got extra gluttony lying around, I highly recommend amplifying this one, it's worth it. Finally, let's look at her portraits real quick. None of Nautika's portraits are required for her to function. Nautika's P1 buffs Warmth to give her even more HP, lets her start with more initial Bloodtithe for an earlier burst, and lowers the counter cost from 8 to 6, which makes it trigger more often and build Bloodtithe faster. P2 greatly amplify her ultimate, increasing the hit count from 24 at 64 Bloodtithe to 27 at 63 Bloodtithe, while also slightly improving the HP scaling on it. Her P3 and P4 don't add much to her kit, but at P5 she gets another massive jump. The ultimate now goes up to 30 hits at 60 Bloodtithe, with a huge boost to scaling that makes it hit even harder. Overall, Nautika is one of the most powerful characters in the game, with both insane damage and incredible survivability. If you play her right, she can brute force through basically any content right now. And I highly recommend both get her Resonance to 15 and Psycoop to Amplify 5 if possible. Now, I want to hear from you guys. After the collab patch, how much did you save up for Nautika? And for those who already pulled her, how did it go? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, this has been Steamed Bun X. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.